As we are making this transformation, there will be impacts on jobs and communities. How do we minimize those? How do we manage those and make sure that we avoid harm? That's one area. The second, I think, is really thinking about the opportunities and to see just transition as a value creation opportunity, particularly for small businesses and for excluded groups. And the third is really a question of uh, sort of building really the sort of human and social capacity for the transition. One of the things that World Resources Institute published today with Systemic was a very interesting piece of long-term research looking at the jobs and skills implications of the transition. And the transition is a good news story. It's going to create lots of jobs, both on the net zero side, but also on the adaptation side. And for that, you need skilled people, men and women, in the right place at the right time. And so really, we should be thinking about this. And I'm glad you have productivity in your title, thinking really about human capital workplace formation as part of the transition. Now, one of the challenges is just transition can be seen to be very philosophical. But I think actually it's for development banks, investment banks, as the banks on this panel, to make it very, very practical. So I'm very interested in particular financial instruments, loans, equities, bonds, and so on, and how we can move to having impact metrics so that we know that we're really making a real difference, both on the net zero side, I would say resilience as well, but also in terms of social impact.
Wonderful. I fully hear that. Resilience is one of the issues that can and push us all forwards in that, and it's often seen as another one. I want to hear another voice because this is really coming more from a scientific and from a concept-based background. So I want to go to the other side of the spectrum, and I would like to pass the word on right now to Danielle, who has a very deliberate voice on how the private sector could or could not make that possible. Coming from the fact that now you don't only have to be green, you still have to be social. How can you still make profits? Which is, to remind us all, the core of why a business is a business. Can you do that when you need to be green and social and all that? What has been your experience? Can you share a bit on that?
Well, thank you, Tanya, for having me, and thank you, my distinguished peers here at the panel, for being here. I think that there's a kind of false trade-off between social green and returns, because when you think about the drivers of profit for any company, the value chain is always a significant part of it. And the value chain is a significant part of the value creation for any business. And especially in Latin America, when we go deep into the value chains, we find several SMEs, we find several people that is not able to get credit in conditions that are suitable for them and that could help them to or mitigate or to adapt themselves or to build resilience. And when a value chain is not resilient, that value chain is not sustainable from a financial perspective and from a value delivery perspective. So investing in the value chain, investing in helping SME sector in building their capabilities to be resilient in terms of building their capabilities to adapt themselves, it's a very good business, because at the end of the day, without SMEs, you don't have, in Latin America, 70% of the employment is SMEs. So if you don't have resilience in that sector, you don't have contractors that are feeding your people that is cleaning your facilities, and so on and so forth. So their prosperity, their social prosperity, is in the best interest of the private sector as well. So the trade-offs, on my view, in that case, are mostly due to you are not incorporating all the key elements that you have to incorporate in your business case. and there are some things that should be factorized into your business case that you're leaving behind, or it's a lack of mental resources and time and effort in solving the apparent dilemmas, but most of them are apparent dilemmas. And let me put a very short example from the practice perspective involving a huge bank, a huge client, and a very atomized value chain in terms of distributors and people that is working with this kind of company. Imagine a company that relies on the last mile, being a last mile, a very fragmented sector. One person, one truck, one company, and many of them. They, for instance, they can afford to buy an electric truck. They are not suitable for a good credit for electric cars. But when the company that is in the middle of this chain is capable of bringing some guarantees for a big bank to loan for those people with good conditions, the entire value chain gets more resilient. It's a good business for the bank. It's a good business for the company that is in the middle of it. And at the end of the chain, there is people, vulnerable people, mostly SMEs, that are getting resources in order to transform themselves, to have a better possibility to generate income, better cost, because it's more efficient, and they are more resilient at the end of the day. So I think that thinking systemically, we can solve those trade-offs.
Interesting. Very interesting. And I wish the entire private sector would see it like that. And I will go back to how we can create that trust and support. But before that, I would like to hear from our co-host here from the Nordic Investment Bank on how you see that, because your logic is around productivity and green. How does social come for you in the game?
Yeah, thanks, Tanya, and welcome everybody from our side. You're right. I mean, we have a mandate, which is productivity and environment, sustainability. So that's our goal. So you're like, okay, what are you doing on this panel? but
co-hosting, co-hosting.
Yeah, co-host, even co-hosting, exactly, the panel. But the truth is, it's quite simple, is that we have as a mission to foster that transition, right, and get the competitiveness and go sustainable. But the moment you try to do that, you immediately discuss social as well. You can't do it without. So I like to think about, CEB is social plus green, and we are green plus social, if you want. And at some point, we overlap. We just come from two different angles. And that, to me, is in essence what this panel is about, right? You can't actually disentangle them. That's a little bit the way we look at it. And as you mentioned at the very beginning, ultimately, you will not be able to have and achieve a transition, and Nick mentioned it, and this is not an evolutionary type of approach. This is a radical, we know the science. We know what type of transition we have ahead of us, we should be having. It's radical, right? Which means it will have impacts on societies. So it's inevitable that if you want it, you have to bring the people with you. If you don't, you're not going to achieve it. So that's very simply how we look at it. Now, what does that mean? What do we actually try to do? I think, Daniel, you were spot on analyzing. We work quite a lot with large corporates, large companies. Now, those typically have, they are very aware of the issue. They have their own internal methods, and they have their weight in society. They, in the case of Nordic countries, typically unionized, so you have very good dialogue, collective agreements, collective discussions, and that goes. But as you permeate down to the SMEs, the suppliers of these large companies, that's actually where disruption, the big company, proud of changing, will have impact on the suppliers, right? Or on, either way, along the value chain. And that's where we as financier, as a bank, you mentioned big banks. Well, we're maybe not that big, but we like to. That's where we can have a little bit of a dialogue with these large players and say, are you really addressing the full value chain? Are you aware of the collateral, let's say, consequences when you want to transition? And we are very happy that you want to transition, but have you thought what that will imply to your suppliers? Are you having a dialogue with them? You can't just change them, right? That's not that's not socially acceptable. You need to think about that. Now we have not come, I have to admit, we have not come yet as far as having an instrument to be able to finance through our large clients the supply chain. I've been thinking about it a lot. We're not there yet. I hope maybe with through some innovation there. Some of the larger clients are able to do that themselves from the balance sheet and help the suppliers. It's even just about how, when they take on, you can offer credit but that's something for sure that I think in the finance world we can think about. Nick, you were asking about products. I think that's like tailoring a product that follows the supply chain and considers the social transition on it could be something to think about.
Thank you. That feeds quite nicely in. What are actually the metrics and frameworks that we would need? And the instruments are there. I think a lot about sustainability-linked lending, but then you only do it in the end. Is that really going to help your clients? I'm not sure. So I would like to know from my dear and esteemed colleague, Carol, what are metrics and frameworks that are needed? How are we looking at climate finance today? I always see those announcements in the joint statements on large numbers. Is this what we care about, or shouldn't we look at indeed what's happening with it? I know you've been very active in this space, and I would like to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think it's important to realize we are here in the joint MDB pavilion, and we also organize joint events. And one of the events that we jointly organized was this morning on the development of so-called just transition indicators. And basically, this question relates to that work because MDBs do realize that it's not only about maximizing climate finance, it's also about maximizing impacts. And impacts are not only in the terms of mitigation and adaptation, but they're also related to just transition, making the transition possible. What we see so far is that we have developed very good metrics for mitigation. Actually, we can report on how many megawatts we have installed. We can report on how many CO2 we reduced or energy that we have saved. Adaptation is already a bit more challenging because, but still, we can say, well, we did this and this amount of investment. We can explain how many investments we made more climate resilient, and we can also explain how many people have been made more climate resilient. But if you go to just transition, then everything starts to be very diffuse, and actually that doesn't send out a very strong signal to the capital markets, but also not to investors in general, on what are you actually doing, what are you actually achieving in your climate projects. And we are a social bank, so we actually do exclusively social projects. What are we actually achieving in terms of just transition? How do you contribute to that? And that is the reason why we are working on developing these output and outcome indicators to describe the impacts of just transition and the impacts of our finance in these areas. And that works two ways. First of all, we give a signal to our shareholders that the project that we invest in are delivering and are delivering measurable outcomes, and not only in terms of we contributed to the transition in the country, but actually making those things measurable. But it will also help in the end. We are a big issuer, for instance, of social investment bonds. How many of these social investment bonds are actually helping to enable the transition? So that is an important topic, and that's why we're working on this, and that's why this framework are required.
Wonderful, thank you. I would like to mix it up. I know that many of you in the audience are expert by yourself. So what are your questions? What are you? And given that I, who am a known feminist, didn't manage to have a more balanced panel, I would like a woman to start. Yeah.
Thank you. So my name is Maria. I am with the Italian delegation here. I represent a small nonprofit foundation based in Calabria, a southern region of Italy. We are actually the ones trying to make finance work in the direction of social impact. We're working a lot with private investors, trying to ensure that the projects that they're developing are actually going to have concrete impact on the communities, and that the people that are coming from more underprivileged backgrounds are going to have access to these opportunities. So I think that my question here would be, how do you think the collaboration can be created between multilateral development banks and nonprofit organizations, especially the smaller ones that are working locally on the territories?
Beautiful question. I think we're going to ditch that bullet off to our colleagues. But I want to hear a little bit more, because for me it's important that we listen to each other and that we're not here to preach you. We can do that online, the preaching thing. But now I want to hear. Who would like to speak? We can also volunteer people.
All right, thank you. Here's a volunteer. So Jukka Honen from the Nordic Investment Bank. What I find interesting, actually, if you think about the mandates of both the CEB and NIB, that the other one is more on social, the other one is on green and productivity. But then, isn't it quite interesting that when you finance, let's say, a school, then basically you are just arguing and justifying the financing with a different story?
Yeah. Yeah. Your question is what you put on first. I can just maybe give one input to that. It really all is about your narrative. It may not be always in a juxtaposition to each other. I hear another voice here. Please, you will have to. Perfect.
Hello, this is Keshav from ICLEI. I work with cities, local government, and as you know, local governments have a lot of plans. They have a lot of projects to be implemented on ground, but what they lack is private sector investment. So if you can tell us specifically what are the different de-risking investment instruments that cities can use to attract more private capital to implement the climate or net zero, to achieve their net zero future.
Super interesting question. Anything else here? Please, don't be shy. You're listening all day. That's the moment where you can speak. Yes. This one works.
I'm a associate professor at London University, Roehampton, and SOAS University of London. I do several projects on just transition in Africa, on mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. And my background is development economics and development finance. So my work is more on the intersection of social science and science. We are looking at behavioral changes on adaptation, resilience, and mitigation. We are working mainly with grassroots. So my question is on, because when we apply for funds, or when there are calls open for academic researches, they are mainly on the tech innovation and its implications. But social innovation is an initial condition for those communities to adopt, mitigate, and gain resilience. Because without social innovation, that means mitigation awareness, climate awareness, resilience awareness. Without this awareness, even if you provide the best technical innovation, technological innovation, it's not being well received. So there are many social barriers for especially grassroots, those who lack access to energy, any type of energy sources. I think that's very important. And we as social science researchers, we are on that side that try to promote social innovation. For example, in my case, we are training communities who lack access to energy on climate adaptation, resilience, clean energy, its benefits, sustainable development goals. And then after that, we see that many of them has a different mindset, adopt a different mindset, and adoption in my project is 100% increase after our trainings. So I think, so my question would be on what is the perspective towards financing social innovation in addition to technological innovation that's going on, because in all pavilions the main priority is, technological innovation and its implications, but behavioral change needs, social barriers needs to be removed in order for these communities to welcome these technological innovations. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. And look, this is good for all. First, you didn't dare to speak, and then you were making a very good case. So I do want to encourage also the silent voices. So I'm going to be assigning a little bit, but this is free flow. I would like you to start on how can we also incorporate the small end of the value chain, the little companies, organizations that are out there wherever they are. That goes back to cities. And then, Luca, I think cities, I'll give you the privilege to answer. If not, Carol or I will take it because we do a lot of city finance, but it would be there. And I'll leave the science questions here. However, you don't have to do what I say. You're very free to do. And if somebody in there disagrees, you're free to lift your hand and I will pass on my mic back.
First of all, I'm loving this dynamic. Thank you. That's my first statement. And thanks to everyone that is raising their voices. It's really encouraging to be in a panel that it's not a panel, but a dialogue. So thanks all. Well, I want you to imagine a small farmer. When it comes to a small farmer that is facing drought, that is facing floods, that is facing loss of biodiversity, that is facing, and because of the loss of biodiversity, is facing loss of productivity. Is that a social or an environmental issue? And let me give you a real example. I come from Chile. In the extreme south of Chile, we have Patagonia. And it's a beautiful place. I was there once for vacations with my family. And there were a lot of signs advertising honey. Okay, we're gonna stop by and buy honey, locally produced. And we stopped by in a small farm, and I started to talk with Silvio, the owner. And I asked him, okay, how's the business? Business guy trying to understand how is its business. And he says, well, I usually produce 5,000 kilos of honey in the season, and now I'm producing 3,000 kilos. That's 40% less. So my next question was, and why is that? It's the same amount of bees and infrastructure and whatever. Yes, the same amount. So what's the reason? Climate change and loss of biodiversity. Then my kids looked at him. Oh, he talks like daddy, you know. But he's a small producer. He never went to university. He has never been to Santiago, which is the capital of my country. He's from ground. And I asked him, well, what about climate change? Why are you arguing that climate change is responsible? Yes, because we have less water, less rain, the glaciers are melting, and so the river has less water from the source and less water to recharge because it's raining less. So less water equals less flowers equals less the ingredients for producing honey. Okay, I don't have a clue if that's right or not, but it sounds very feasible and very it sounds right. Okay, understood. And what about biodiversity, you said? It's because of the rising temperatures, the bugs and the little ants and all the little species that helps us to, as pollinators, they are dying. So we have less income for the machinery and less workers, so less production. In that summer, Silvio was 40% poorer than 3 years ago. So where's the edge between environment and social? We have three decisions to make as humanity. What do we want to do for adaptation? What do we want to do for mitigation? And how much suffering we are willing to accept? And those three are levers of the same machine. So we need to decide the mix, the acceptable mix between adaptation, mitigation, and also suffering. That is the opposite of resilience. But I like to put it on a more dramatic way, right? And when it comes to the more vulnerable people, climate and social is the same thing. There is no separation between those impacts. And that's the way that I think that we should be thinking ahead. And there's people that want to raise their voice too, and that's wonderful. This is the first COP4 that we have freedom to speech, to say whatever. This is good to be happening.
I agree.
I particularly find interesting that they didn't include, that they did even include a Santa there in the back.
Yes.
So it is definitely a cultural mixture of things. I will go back to you now that we can speak again, but I also really want to encourage you, if you disagree or simply have a question, lift your hand like back in school.
I don't quite remember what you gave me, but I'm gonna go with my own.
I expected that from you, Luca.
Thank you. Yeah, you knew me. Wonderful set of questions. I'm gonna answer trying to connect a few of those. I will start with the behavioral change science and that part. I think you're spot on. I think we typically underestimate that. That's my first observation. Ultimately, if you take about climate change, what we're trying to do, it is a massive change management exercise. Sorry for using some corporate lingo, but effectively, that's what it is. That's what it is. We want to change completely, and you will have visionaries that will push that change. You will have followers. You will have resistance. You will have fear. You will have all the typical social behavior reactions to change. And we do not invest. We very quickly go to the technological solution, whatever it is that we want to change, rather than discussing how do we implement the change and the manage, and how do we manage, especially the people. You mentioned, Nick, that people should be at the core of it, and very quickly we tend not to put them there. Yeah, and I'm an engineer, by the way, so I tend to do that. I tend to do that. So I think absolutely we should do more of that. It is ultimately a big, it is about the uptake, the belief in the change, what does it mean for me, the uptake of the change, and only through, at that point, can you get really people to follow the change, right? Possibly. Sometimes you might not have that even there. And that
It is not the issue of affordability. So, when we explain our project, people ask about affordability. Even if you increase awareness, then there is financial barrier. But there is inclusive finance options, like, for example, in my own case studies, pay-as-you-go solar. So these companies provide products on a 2 years incremental payment plan, which households are not aware, and it's quite affordable for them to pay. But since they have this, inherited, idea from past that, if they have to buy this product, they have to pay all cost, all upfront cost is the full amount. But what we did, we bridged these people with these easy finance options, which they are. So the issue is even not financial, but the issue is entirely lack of awareness, because it is affordable for them. And even using kerosene, collecting firewood is more costly for them, which they are not aware. Yeah. So we increase this awareness through our trainings, and after they adopt, we collect data, and they also confirm from their end that adopting these clean energy solutions is more cost effective for them, but they were not aware before the project and before adopting this. But this is all through awareness. So I'm telling, finance is even not a barrier
No,
Yeah.
no, I,
It's entirely
absolutely.
awareness, lack of awareness on these climate solutions.
It's awareness, it's communication, it's listening to each other,
Exactly.
understanding the
Exactly.
different points of views, and then finding common ways
It
to
is
resolve.
also because of the conflict of interest in the parties. For example, governments are too policy oriented. They want to. They perceive it as an obligation. They just implement and leave. Companies profit oriented, and society is cost oriented. So this conflict of interest actually set up several barriers between these three parties as well. So if all parties have a little bit of social welfare and climate awareness, their objectives improved, and it also set up bridges between these three parties, which we did in our pilot. So these three parties are connected. NGOs are working with private sector is connected to government now. So, but it all comes through awareness. Yeah.
You want to answer that? Go ahead.
Just two
Of
more
course.
reflections also, and linking it also to the question around local communities, right? Because I'll add a couple of words that I think are key. Ultimately, it's about partnership. I think, we are financier, we are a bank. We will have a large implementer of whatever, a project in a local community, and then you have we need to partner. It's one goal, right? So that's a little bit, it's about partnership, but it's also about accountability. So each one, the large company has a certain accountability. We have a certain accountability. And here I'm maybe going to be a bit controversial. Also, the local community has a certain level of accountability. Let's be honest, right? So we are all there. We need to discuss, and we all need to potentially embrace the change. The change is worth it only if it creates value. Sorry, I do work for a bank. So ultimately, but it's also biodiversity value. I mean, value can be defined in many ways, but it's value creation. But then what is important is that we need to share that value creation. And that's where the dialogue needs to happen, and where we need to set up the right incentives to share that value creation honestly and accountably among the parties. Now, it's easy said. The recipe is difficult. He gave you a little bit of an example. I will not give a specific example, but that to me is a little bit the recipe, and ultimately to get change and value for all. But I'll allow Nick.
Yes, we're going to give that to Nick, and then you can already think about a question. If I see someone leave meanwhile, I will call on them. Don't worry. So stay and think about your question, because I will give it back to the audience.
Thanks very much. Really good questions. And as I was thinking the questions, I think it's important to think about real places and real examples, which I think you were touching on. I think also we need to think about different types of finance. For different social issues, we need different types of finance. So some of the things are going to be grant finance, potentially, where investment banks may not be the right places. But even so, there could be loans to municipalities, supporting municipalities who can then provide capacity building. And one of the things I think is underestimated in the just transition is capacity building. So I think it's a major piece. But we've got to think about what is the right type of finance for that. Who is the right provider of that type of finance? I think we also need to learn from some of the examples at the LSE. We were developing a series of case studies looking at various different examples. And I think we already have a number of working examples. This isn't just theory. We have corporations who are incorporating the social dimension, workforce, community, consumer, supply chain into their transition plans. So this is something that a bank like the Nordic Investment Bank, they can assess whether a company is doing this effectively. I think there are also good examples of community ownership, and I think that's maybe another area where development banks can provide loans to community ownership of assets, particularly renewables. And that, I think, again, provides a way of giving social value in a very economic way, which I think puts into your notion of value. And then I think there's the regional, territorial role of development banks, particularly thinking about areas where there's going to be a change in employment, where I think maybe a social focus in terms of SME development is going to be particularly relevant. So I think there are working examples, and the key issue is we've got to be fairly simple looking at metrics. There isn't a long list of special just transition metrics out there. They're relatively simple around employment, around community benefits, around employment, around gender, which we haven't spoken about yet. So I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel, is the answer.
So Carol, yes, I'll let you quickly. That gives you time, and afterwards it's going to go back.
Yeah, I do it. There were 2 points that I want to reflect on, and the first point, and that is the question that's being asked quite often: to what extent, how can we, I would say, get in more private sector finance? And actually, maybe that's not the question to begin with. If you have, in general, if you are going to develop a renewable energy project, it takes on average 10 years to develop a wind park, or even longer. These are, I would say, obstacles, and it has to do with the fact that I would say the social situation, the public acceptance situation, is not well understood. It basically it also shows the role of MDBs, but also the role of municipalities to basically to prepare communities, cities, countries to make those investments more attractive for private sector, not only from a financial point of view, but also from a point of view of that they will be publicly accepted, and that they will that it will be, I would say, easy to implement. So that is one element. The other element that I would reflect on has to do with the scale of projects. We saw, and maybe this is a bit of a criticism to MDBs as well, because we saw the examples this morning, which were relatively large-scale projects, while sometimes smaller scale projects would work better. And that basically means that MDBs need to work more together with local banks, with local financiers, but even with, I would say, microfinance associations to enable changes on a very, very local scale. And I think this is something for the MDBs also to look better to, in the end also to make the changes that are needed.
So before someone is leaving, which I see here to my right, who has a question in the audience?
I have another question. NIB and CB are looking at the school that I mentioned from different perspectives. But if you would imagine that CB and NIB would merge, there would be just one mandate, which is covering all these different aspects. Do you think that would actually bring more business opportunities? Or would it be just 1 + 1 is 2? Or would there be some restrictive that, you know, we cannot do this because of environmental reasons, or social reasons? So how would you see the business opportunities of this kind of merger?
Wonderful question. I will ask more questions before we take that, and then Luca may answer that, no? Who else would like to have a question? I can call, I know some of your names, so I can call out people in case you don't volunteer. Would you like to ask a question? I would like to have more female voices. There's no wrong question. There's really none.
Oh, thank you. Sure, I can ask a question. I'm from the Global CCS Institute, so Carbon Capture and Storage. And maybe this question to Nick Robbins on how you see future investment in CCS, because it does require a high investment infrastructure cost. So how can we create models that can stimulate investment towards this technology? Thank you.
Interesting. Another question around? Something? No? I will not stop till we have one more. Yeah. I was about to call. So I'm good that people who I know by name volunteer before they're called.
Hi, everyone. So how do you think we can navigate changing political scenes around the world within the context of net zero finance? Especially when people need to build systems and build structures in an environment where there's no certainty.
So I'll give it back to the panel. You can already think about one thing you want to say in the end, everyone. So that's a little bit how we want to create that new. Who would like to start here? You would like to start.
So I think the question. I think the question about CCS is very interesting because increasingly I see CCS being argued not from an emissions point of view, but actually from a jobs point of view. Now CCS, unlike other technologies, always adds to cost.
We want results.
Yeah, it's always going to be an additional cost. So you're always going to have to find a way of paying for that. And as we know, that has traditionally been from government budgets. And that has been one of the major constraints, and obviously that can be funded through carbon markets. But I think one of the arguments for CCS is it can provide an anchor for jobs in high carbon sectors in particular regions. Now, the risk, of course, is that non-CCS means of getting to net zero can be developed potentially quicker. And I think there is a shrinking opportunity set for CCS. It's no longer in power. It's potentially in some areas, but I think we're going to see a shrinking opportunity set, and we're going to have to be thinking about some of the social implications of that.
What? I can try actually. I'm not going to comment on a merger, Tanya. I think you should comment on it. But I think you had a fantastic question about what does it mean in the world we live in now, which is even more fragmented, even more uncertain. I think I would answer in two ways, and we were discussing a little bit, Nick, and I'll let you maybe elaborate. But first, I would say that in some way, you could argue that we are where we are is partly a consequence of not doing always our job properly in considering social elements when change happens. Not necessarily only for green change, can be digitalization, it can be many other changes that happen, and we are not always, as I mentioned before, good at sharing the value creation. I think we have seen an aggregation of value creation lately. I'm going to be a bit philosophical, and that drives a little bit some of the tensions that we see today. So first is actually a little bit of and then I would say that in an uncertain world, this topic becomes even more important. Because if you want to put change in something that is uncertain, people will be even more, it's natural. I would also be a little bit more fearful, right? It's less clear to see what is going to happen. So you react by saying, I'm excluded, I'm not part of this, I don't want it. So if anything, I would say the current state puts even more importance on what actually you were mentioning about, the need to consider the side effects all the time. Sorry I didn't answer fully your question, a little bit of insight maybe, but it was a fantastic question.
And can I add something to the uncertainty that we are living in? I think that it's true. There's a volatile world outside, but it's also true some things that are really certainty and that will be here and will be as a certainty in the future as well. It is certain that we are heating up. It is certain that without Paris Agreement, we would be 0.9 to 1 degree above our country. It is certain that we are advancing. It is certain that we are in the right direction. We are not at the right speed, but as long as those certainties are there, the risk of investing in fighting that certainty is a lower risk than investing in something that is facing uncertainty. We know for sure that we need to adapt and mitigate. We know for sure that we will be facing more strong weather events, and we will be facing more disruptions in our productivity mechanisms, in our value chain, in our operations. It is true that to harvest rice in Vietnam, we're gonna have to work at night, and people is gonna have to work at night, and that's a lack of productivity because your shifts are gonna be split in two, and we know for sure that that will be like that. So in an uncertain world, there are some crises and some opportunities that are an anchor of certainty, and we have the opportunity to invest behind the solution for those things that we know for sure that will remain there.
Yes, Kyle.
Yeah, because I'm triggered by the merger question, and this question is, I would say, more relevant than you would think, because it has a very strong relationship with the title of this event, productivity and social impact. And actually, if you look at Europe, and we are both European banks, then there are a number of challenges in Europe. This is related to security, it's related to productivity, it's related to competitiveness, it's related to lack of innovation, and also very importantly, it is related to social cohesion. And actually, climate change is going through all these elements as a cost-cutting topics. And apart from the fact that you are very nice, I would say, colleagues, I think working together and having these different perspectives on the same topic, it's really about the future of Europe and making the transition possible. You have to address all these elements at the same time. And actually, by having both a focus on productivity as well as a focus on social is such a natural thing that we need to do now. And I would also really add the importance of the social cohesion, because it is strongly related also to the productivity and the labor force that we have in Europe, and all types of, I would say, making sure that Europe is skilled for that young people are actually able to contribute to the transition, and I think that's a role that we both can play. Thank you.
So Isa was asking for social innovation, and I will do something new now. I would like you to turn in groups of 2 or 3, and I give you 3 minutes to share what you've learned in this panel. And no, you not simply go. That's not okay. So just really next to you, there may be really the next expert that knows much more than me at least. So turn to him or her and share what you've learned. You're flexible in those groups. And it's a nice opportunity to meet someone you may not know. You guys will be able to reflect, but you can also talk to each other. I'm very open to that. We can discuss the merger. We stay in Paris, though.
Yeah,
Please, just jump in.
it's a good idea.
Yeah, sorry, but I thought it was... No, because they listen all day. It's getting boring. Hello, we lost two, whatever. It's okay. No, and I mean, people also got to go. No, and I know sometimes also, if I have to leave. Yeah. We could maybe in Africa push the real transition forward. And Isa was talking about innovation. So she made they're exchanging material. You have another 1.5 minutes, so make sure that each one of you gets to say something. I will ask you, make the transition real. So please, another 15 seconds to wrap up. 15 seconds. I'm sure afterwards you can discuss as long as you want. You can exchange your cards, your WhatsApp or whatever, but now you need to come back. Because we have 4 minutes left and I have 4 panelists. So that means that I will give each of them a minute to make their learnings. I don't want a conclusion statement. I want what you've learned from listening and from exchanging. So some people here are not listening to me. You can chat later, guys. Please turn. We have 4 minutes left. I give each of them 1 minute. And given that I started so often on this side, I would love to start with Nick and Karel now.
What I think was interesting, Aisha, listening to you is I've also been looking at this issue as a concept of social innovation, and we haven't really been using that enough in the net zero agenda. We talk a lot about technology, a lot about policy, and I think that's the real opportunity now to think about that. So I mean, it's a phrase I use, so it's interesting to hear that being used as well. I think this question of capacity building, particularly of communities, is very important. And that again needs a more, maybe a different response both from commercial banks and public banks. And the third area is, I think we still need to maybe, I hope in a year's time, we would come back with a clearer set of examples from both banks about how we were wearing glasses, one environmental, one social, but we actually got pure 2020 vision.
Wonderful. Karel, what have you learned?
Well, I just want to build upon what you said and actually what we discussed with the two of us, and that is that we have to change our narrative as well, because now and it's really what you say, you have these different classes. You can look at it project from a financial point, from a productivity point, from a social point, but we need to have, I would say, we need to develop new transition language. And even the word transition is already a bit of a tricky word. So let's work on that, and that's what I've learned here.
So new narrative emerging. Luca.
Yeah, I think my 2 takeaways would be definitely the 2 questions that you raised around I call it change management, but social innovation, using the instruments and financing them as well. Not only just saying that we should do them, but actually try to identify some instruments, some products, financial products that maybe should take that into account. That's a reflection as a banker. And then the other thing that I learned was a little bit earlier on, but when you mentioned this, a lot of the change and probably the pain is more in the smaller supply chain SMEs. And so somehow, and you also mentioned, in the local product. So somehow also we need to be able to design an instrument, that's what I take away, that is able to go and get that tail. Because from a project perspective, it looks like a tail, from a social perspective, it's probably the elephant. So that's what I took away.
And my 5 cents on this are, first of all, I agree that we need to change the narrative. These are times of it's very easy to get pessimistic. Things are not easy today, but we have done things much harder to do than what we need to do now. We've been able to put a man on the moon in 9 years. We've been able to close the ozone hole in quite few years. We have been able to create a lot of derivatives instrument and a lot of creativity put in the finance world in behind some very good instruments and also behind some very junk instruments. And we were very creative on that. And we are very creative to find the ways to put people maybe in 10 years or 20 years in Mars, and we have the money to do so. So I'm very optimistic that the challenges that we are facing in this transition are much easier to resolve than many of the things that mankind has been able to do.
Beautiful. I think that's an amazing ending statement. I'd love to live with that. Several of us are still around. Do reach out. You have our names. We're all on social media and we're all here. So talk to us. Thank you very much for playing and going with a little bit of social innovation here. We even have those pictures, but those